You said you liked summer dresses, she said, smoothing the skirt with one hand, eyes finding mine across the porch. So. Do you? I looked at her once. Took my time. More than I expected to, I said. She smiled, slow, knowing, and reached past me for her tea without breaking eye contact. Good, she said quietly. Then let's not waste the morning. I didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Before we begin, has someone ever shown up and made every wall you built feel completely pointless? Drop it in the comments, hit subscribe, and let's go back to where this all started. My name is Brody Callahan, and I want to be honest with you up front, I am not the kind of man stories usually get written about. I'm a fly fishing guide out of Colorado Springs. I wake up before sunrise, I pull on waders, I spend my days standing in cold mountain rivers showing tourists how to read the water and talk to trout. I come home smelling like pine sap and river mud. I eat dinner alone, I read until my eyes give out, and I sleep like a man who has made peace with the quiet. I have a rescue mutt named Shepherd, half border collie, half something mysterious, who follows me everywhere and judges me silently from across the room. My cabin sits at the edge of the pines, creaky in the cold, warm in a way that has nothing to do with the thermostat. It is small and entirely mine. I built the porch myself, sanded and stained every board. I'm telling you all of this because you need to understand the kind of man I am before I tell you what happened to me last June. Because what happened to me last June was the last thing I ever expected. And if you'd told me 12 months before that a blind date, of all things, would change the direction of my life, I would have handed you my fishing rod and told you to go stand in the river until you came to your senses. My friend Grady is the reason any of this started. Grady is one of those men who is perpetually, almost religiously, convinced that everyone around him needs to be nudged toward happiness. His own marriage is so solid and cheerful it seems to cause him physical discomfort when the people around him are single. He texts me on a Friday evening in late May while I'm elbow deep in woodworking, sanding the legs of a cedar side table, sawdust in my beard, Shepherd asleep on my feet, and his message reads, blind date. Sunday, 3 p.m. The Lakeview Cafe on Prospect. She's great. Don't argue. I stared at that message for a long time. Long enough that Shepherd cracked one eye open and looked at me like he already knew the answer was going to be no. The problem was, Grady had done this to me before. 2 years back he swore up and down that a woman from his wife's yoga class was perfect for me, and I showed up to dinner to find a perfectly pleasant person who spent the first 40 minutes explaining the emotional intelligence of her pet iguana. She showed me videos. On a first date. The iguana had its own Instagram account. I paid the check, drove home, and did not speak to Grady for 11 days. So when he followed up that Friday text with, "Trust me. You'll thank me later. This one's different." I sat back on my stool, looked at Shepherd, and said out loud, "This is a trap." Shepherd blinked. I typed back, "If this is another reptile situation, you owe me a year of fishing license fees." Grady replied with 4 laughing emojis, which was not reassuring. Sunday came the way Sundays in early June do in Colorado, slow and golden, with the kind of warmth that makes everything feel slightly too good to be true. I was back in the workshop by 9, putting a second coat of stain on the table. The morning smelled like cedar and coffee, and the meadow behind my cabin was full of that particular early summer birdsong that sounds like the world is showing off. I kept one eye on the clock and one eye on the door, half hoping for a reason not to go, a rainstorm, a phone call, a sudden and convenient flat tire. No such luck. At 2:15, I washed my hands, stared at myself in the bathroom mirror for approximately 4 seconds, and decided that trying too hard would only make things worse. Clean jeans. Flannel shirt, rolled to the elbows. My worn-in work boots. I looked like myself, which was either the right call or a disaster, but it was all I had. Shepherd followed me to the front door with his tail going and that earnest, worried expression he gets when I leave. "Guard the cabin," I told him. He sat. He did not look convinced. The drive to Lakeview Cafe took 20 minutes. The closer I got, the more certain I became that Grady's truck would be in the parking lot, that he and his wife would be crouched behind a bush somewhere with a camera, waiting to immortalize my humiliation. But when I pulled in, the lot was just ordinary Sunday cars, families walking by the reservoir, a couple of kayaks on the water, nothing suspicious. The cafe itself was warm-toned wood and big windows overlooking the lake, and it smelled the way good cafes always smell, roasted coffee and something sweet and faintly cinnamon. I ordered a black coffee and picked a table by the window. 3 o'clock came and went. Then 5 passed. Then 10. I sat there with my phone face down and my coffee going lukewarm, watching the door, running the math on exactly how much longer I owed this situation before I could leave with dignity intact. At 3:15, I pushed my chair back and stood up. And that was the exact moment the door chimed open. I looked up expecting nothing, and saw her, and here's the part that still gets me when I think about it, she walked in like she wasn't performing anything. No grand entrance, no scan of the room to see who was watching. She stepped inside, adjusted the strap of her bag, and looked around with calm, unhurried eyes. She was blonde, not pale or washed out, but warm golden blonde, swept up into a soft, neat twist at the back of her neck, a few loose strands curling at her jaw. She wore a light blue floral summer dress, the kind that moves when you walk, with a small white linen blouse over it, sleeves rolled once. She looked like someone who had gotten dressed with intention but no fuss. Like she just happened to look like that. Her eyes found mine across the room. She didn't look away. She walked over. And everything I had decided about Sunday afternoons, blind dates, and the general foolishness of hope, every bit of it, went very, very quiet. I almost sat back down. That sounds ridiculous now, but in that exact moment, her walking toward me, calm and certain, the whole cafe going soft around the edges, my first instinct was that she had the wrong table. That she was heading for someone behind me, someone more expected, someone who hadn't spent the last 15 minutes rehearsing his exit. I half turned to check. There was nobody behind me. Just the window and the lake. She stopped in front of my table and smiled. Not a big smile, not the kind people put on when they're nervous and covering it. A small, genuine one, like she found something quietly amusing about the whole situation and wasn't in any rush to explain it. "Brody," she said. My name in her voice did something strange to the air in the room. "Yeah," I said, standing up too fast. My knee caught the edge of the table. My coffee sloshed hard against the rim and nearly went over. I grabbed the cup with both hands like that would undo the last 3 seconds. It did not. She laughed, soft, short, not unkind. The kind of laugh that says you're human and that's fine. "Hazel," she said, and held out her hand. Her fingers were warm. The handshake was quick, but I felt it for longer than it lasted. I gestured at the chair across from me like I was introducing her to furniture she'd never seen before. She sat down without making me feel like an idiot about any of it, which I was already grateful for. For a moment we just looked at each other. Not awkwardly, more like two people arriving at the same place from different directions and needing a second to catch their breath. "So," she said, setting her bag down and folding her hands on the table. "I'm going to guess your friend told you almost nothing useful and made it sound like a favor." I let out a breath that was half laugh. Grady texted me 4 laughing emojis as reassurance. "You." My friend Claire said, and I'm quoting directly here, "Just show up, you'll thank me, he's one of the good ones." She tilted her head slightly. She also refused to tell me what you looked like, what you did for a living, or whether you owned furniture. "I own furniture," I said. "I actually build it." "So." Hazel's eyes lit up just a little. "Well. You're already ahead of whatever I was imagining." I asked her if she thought it was a setup. She said absolutely, without hesitation, told me she'd sat in her car in the parking lot for 4 minutes deciding whether to walk in. That she'd finally gone with the logic that worst case, she'd waste an hour and have a mildly terrible story to tell Claire. I told her I'd been ready to leave 30 seconds before she walked through the door. She nodded like that was the only reasonable response to a blind date. So we almost missed each other entirely, she said. By about 30 seconds, I agreed. She looked at me steadily for a moment. That's a strange thought. It was. I didn't say so out loud, but the strangeness of it sat in my chest like a stone dropping into still water. We talked for 2 hours. I'm not sure either of us fully noticed how much time had passed. She told me she grew up in Fort Collins, that she'd moved to Colorado Springs 6 years ago, that she worked as a patient coordinator at a rehabilitation clinic and had somehow never learned to like coffee. She ordered chamomile tea and held the mug in both hands all afternoon like it was keeping her anchored. I told her about guiding on the Arkansas River, about the way fly fishing is less about catching anything and more about learning to read something that never holds still. She listened the way some people never learn to, without filling the pauses, without waiting for her turn to talk. She just listened, and her eyes stayed on mine, and it made me want to keep talking, which is not something I'm generally known for. At some point the afternoon light shifted across the table and turned golden the way it does in June, and I noticed the way it caught the blonde of her hair where the loose strands fell along her jaw, and I had a thought I didn't entirely know what to do with, that this woman was the most quietly beautiful person I had ever sat across from in my life. She caught me looking. "What?" she asked, almost amused. "Nothing," I said. "Just, this wasn't what I expected." "Good nothing or bad nothing?" I picked up my coffee. "Entirely good." Hazel smiled at that, fuller this time, reaching her eyes, and looked out at the lake. The water had gone copper in the late light. A heron stood completely still near the far bank, like it was listening too. We stayed until the cafe started filling up with the dinner crowd and the staff very politely began hovering. We walked out into the warm June evening together. In the parking lot, she turned to me and said she'd had a genuinely nice time, and the way she said genuinely, like she'd half expected not to, made me smile. I told her the same. She pulled out her phone. I gave her my number. She texted me one word right there on the spot so I'd have hers, Hazel. Like a signature. Like a beginning. I drove home with the windows down. Shepard was waiting at the door, tail going, nose working overtime on my boots. I scratched his ears and looked around my small, quiet cabin, the worn couch, the stacked fly boxes, the crooked first table I'd ever built, and something about the space felt different. Not empty. Just waiting. I didn't text Grady that night. I wasn't ready to give him the satisfaction yet. But I was already thinking about whether Hazel liked rivers. The first time I texted Hazel, it was Tuesday morning, 2 days after the cafe. I was standing in the Arkansas River at 6:15, thigh-deep in cold current, watching a client fumble a roll cast upstream. The mist was still sitting low on the water. The cottonwoods on the bank were that impossible early summer green that only lasts about 2 weeks before the heat toughens them up. I had no good reason to be thinking about a woman I'd met once over coffee. And yet. I typed, "Do you like rivers?" She replied 11 minutes later, "I've never been properly introduced to one." Is that an offer? I smiled at my phone in the middle of the Arkansas River like a man who had entirely lost the plot. My client hooked a brown trout 20 seconds later and started hollering, and I pocketed my phone and went back to work. But the rest of the morning felt lighter than it had any right to be. We went to the river that Saturday. I took her to a quiet bend below Salida that most tourists never find, a long flat stretch where the water runs clear over pale limestone and the willows lean in close on both sides. Hazel wore jeans rolled to the knee and stood at the edge with her sandals in one hand, testing the current with her toes like she was negotiating with it. Her hair was down that day, loose and gold in the morning light, and she'd tucked a piece of it behind her ear with the casual confidence of a woman entirely comfortable in her own skin. I didn't put a rod in her hands. I just showed her how to read the water, where the current breaks around a submerged rock, where a trout might hold in the shade, what the surface tells you about what's happening underneath. She asked questions the whole time, real ones, not polite ones. She wanted to understand the logic of it. By the time we ate lunch on a flat boulder midstream, our feet in the cold water and sandwiches going slightly warm in the sun, I had already told her more about my life than I'd told most people in years. She told me things too, carefully at first, then with more ease. She'd been married for 9 years to a man named Mark, a contractor, steady on the outside, difficult on the inside. She said the marriage hadn't ended in one dramatic moment but in a slow accumulation of small surrenders, each one so minor it was easy to justify, until one day she looked up and didn't recognize the version of herself that had been doing all the surrendering. The divorce had been finalized 14 months ago. She said it without bitterness, just the plain tiredness of someone who has carried something heavy for a long time and finally set it down. "Do you miss it?" I asked. "The marriage, I mean. Any part of it?" She thought about that honestly. "I miss the idea of it," she said. "The version I thought it was going to be. But the actual thing?" She shook her head. "No." I nodded. I didn't push further. But I filed it away, not because it worried me, but because I wanted to understand her correctly, and understanding Hazel felt like learning a river. Patient work. Worth doing right. The following weekend she took me to meet her mother. That surprised me, not that she'd suggested it, but how naturally she said it, like it was the obvious next thing. Her mother, Ruth, lived in a small house in Manitou Springs, tucked into the hillside with a garden that had clearly been loved for decades. Ruth was 71, sharp-eyed and deliberate, with Hazel's same quality of stillness and a dry humor that surfaced without warning. She shook my hand, looked me over with the frank assessment of someone who had earned the right, and said, "Hazel told me you build furniture. Sit down and tell me something interesting." I liked her immediately. We stayed 3 hours. I fixed a sticking kitchen drawer while I was there because I noticed it and couldn't not. Ruth watched me do it with an expression I couldn't quite read. When Hazel went to the garden to cut some herbs, Ruth looked at me across the kitchen and said quietly, "She's had a hard few years. She doesn't show it the way some people do, but it's there." She paused. "I just want you to know that." "I know," I said. "I'm paying attention." Ruth nodded once and said nothing else. But something passed between us in that kitchen that felt like a kind of permission. On the drive home, Hazel was quiet in a soft way, her elbow on the window, watching the mountains go by. At a red light she turned to me and said, "She liked you. She doesn't hide it when she doesn't." "I liked her too," I said. "You've got her eyes." Hazel looked at me for a moment, something unguarded moving across her face. Then she turned back to the window. But she reached over and rested her hand on the console between us, and I put mine over hers, and we drove the rest of the way home like that, not saying much, the mountains pink in the evening light. That was the moment I knew I was in real trouble. The good kind. What I didn't know yet was that Mark, the ex-husband, the contractor, the long shadow of her past 9 years, was about to make himself very present again. And that when he did, it would force both of us to stop being careful and start being honest. It started with a phone call Hazel didn't answer. We were on my porch on a Wednesday evening in late June, the kind of evening that makes Colorado feel like it was designed specifically to humble you, warm air, long light, the pines throwing long shadows across the meadow, the first fireflies just beginning to test themselves in the grass below the tree line. Hazel was in the wooden rocker I'd built last winter, her legs folded under her, a glass of iced tea sweating in her hand. She was telling me about a patient at her clinic, a retired schoolteacher learning to walk again after a hip replacement, and she was laughing about something the woman had said, and I was watching her laugh more than I was listening to the story, which was becoming a habit I had no interest in breaking. Then her phone lit up on the armrest. She glanced at it and the laugh stopped. Not dramatically, just stopped, like a faucet turned off. Her face didn't crumple or harden. It went carefully neutral in the way faces do when someone has practiced not reacting. She turned the phone face down without answering. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said. Then, after a pause, "It was Mark." I didn't say anything. I'd learned by then that Hazel didn't need me to fill silences with reassurance. She needed me to stay still and let her find her own words. "He does this sometimes," she said, picking at the condensation on her glass. "Calls out of nowhere. No real reason. Just enough to remind me he's still there, I think." She shook her head slightly. 14 months and he still doesn't quite believe it's finished. "Has he been difficult?" I asked carefully. She considered the word. "Not threatening. Just persistent. He showed up at my mother's house in May, before you and I met. Said he wanted to talk. Ruth didn't let him past the porch." A small, tired smile. "She's tougher than she looks." "I noticed," I said. Hazel looked out at the meadow. The fireflies were more confident now, little cold lights drifting up through the grass. "I don't want him to be a thing between us," she said quietly. "I don't want to give him that much space." "He's not between us," I said. "But you can tell me when he's bothering you." "That's not giving him space. That's just letting me in." She looked at me then, something careful and searching in her eyes. Then she nodded, just once, and picked up her iced tea again. The evening recovered itself. We stayed on the porch until the stars came out. But I noticed she kept her phone face down the rest of the night. The second call came the following Saturday. This time he left a voicemail. Hazel listened to it in her car before coming inside my cabin, and I knew something had shifted before she even reached the door. There was a tightness in the way she moved, a contained quality, like she was carrying something breakable and trying not to show the effort. She told me what it said. He'd heard she was seeing someone. He didn't name me, but the implication was clear enough. The message was calm on the surface, she said, but underneath it was the particular calmness of someone who uses calm as a form of pressure. I felt something cold and sharp move through me that I recognized from years of guiding, the particular alertness that comes when the water changes and you need to pay attention. Not panic. Just a heightened, focused quiet. "Do you want me to?" I started. "No," she said, firmly but not unkindly. "I handle Mark. I've always handled Mark. She stopped. Pressed her fingers to her forehead. "I need a minute." I gave her the minute. I made coffee. Shepard padded over to her and pressed his flank against her leg with the solemn reliability he reserves for people he's decided matter. Hazel reached down and stroked his ear without looking, automatically, like it helped. The week that followed was harder. Hazel was present but slightly pulled back, like a tide going out just enough to notice. We still talked every day. We still met for dinner on Thursday at a quiet Italian place she liked on the north side. But there was something she was holding back, some door she'd cracked open and then quietly pulled shut again, and I could feel the distance of it even when she was sitting right next to me. I didn't push. I told myself I was being respectful. But if I'm being honest, I was also scared that Mark, without even being physically present, was managing to do what I'd been afraid of since the beginning, remind Hazel of all the reasons that wanting something again was dangerous. Then the storm came. Not as a metaphor, an actual Colorado thunderstorm, the kind that rolls in off the mountains in late June with almost no warning, the sky going green-gray in 20 minutes, the temperature dropping 8 degrees in an hour. I was in the workshop when it hit, rain hammering the roof, lightning cracking somewhere close over the ridge. Shepard was agitated, pacing. I just put the kettle on when I heard tires on the gravel. I opened the door before she knocked. Hazel stood on my porch with her hair damp at the ends, her white linen blouse darkened at the shoulders from the rain, her expression the most unguarded I had ever seen it. Not broken. Just done holding everything at arm's length. "I didn't want to be alone tonight," she said. I stepped back and held the door open wide. Then don't be, I said. She came inside and I closed the door behind her and the storm sealed us in together, rain against the windows, thunder rolling low over the ridge, the cabin lit warm and amber from the lamp in the corner. Shepard circled her once, then pressed himself against her leg with his full weight, the way he does when he's made a final decision about someone. Hazel laughed softly and bent to scratch behind his ears, and when she straightened up her eyes were bright in a way that was close to tears but hadn't crossed over yet. I took her wet blouse, she had a camisole underneath, and hung it by the wood stove to dry. I put the kettle back on. Peppermint tea, the kind she'd mentioned once in passing 3 weeks ago that she drank when she couldn't settle. I'd bought a box without making anything of it. She noticed it on the counter and looked at me for a moment without speaking. We sat on the couch with the blanket from the back of it pulled over our laps, mugs warm in our hands, Shepard curled across both our feet like a living anchor. The rain was steady and the thunder was moving east and the cabin felt like the only solid thing in the county. For a while neither of us talked. It was the kind of silence that has weight and texture, that means something, that you don't fill just to fill it. Then Hazel stared into her mug and said, "It's not just Mark." I waited. "It's everything," she said. "The marriage. The years I spent making myself smaller so there'd be less of me to disappoint him. The way I convinced myself that quiet and lonely were the same as stable." She swallowed. "After the divorce I promised myself I was done. Done hoping for something I'd only ever seen go wrong." She looked at me then, and her eyes were steady even though her voice was not quite. "And then you happened, Brody." My throat tightened. I stayed still. "I haven't felt safe like this in a long time," she said. "Safe enough to actually want something again. And that scares me more than Mark does. More than any of it." I turned toward her on the couch, my shoulder against hers. "What scares you exactly?" I asked. "Wanting it, or losing it?" Her breath caught. "Both," she said. "I'm older than you. I've got a mother who needs me. I've got a past that keeps finding new ways to knock on my door. I don't want to become something heavy in your life, Brody. I don't want to be the thing that complicated a life that was working fine." I felt something flare in my chest, not anger, but something close to it, the way you feel when someone undervalues something that matters to you. "You're not heavy," I said. "Hazel. You are the first person who has made this life feel like it's for something. That cabin I built, that porch, those mornings on the river, they were fine. They were quiet and fine and completely mine. But fine isn't the same as full." I held her eyes. "You make it full." She stared at me. Something moved across her face, the particular expression of a person deciding whether they're allowed to believe something wonderful. "And if one day you realize you want something easier," she whispered. "Someone without all of this." I reached up and touched her cheek with my thumb, gently, the way you'd handle something you didn't want to startle. "I don't want easy," I said. "I want real. I want you." Her lips parted. Her eyes filled but didn't spill. She looked at me for a long moment, searching my face for the exit clause, for the hesitation, for the thing that would make it make less sense. She didn't find one. She set her mug down on the coffee table with a small unsteady click. I leaned toward her slowly, no rush, giving her every chance to change the geometry of the moment. She didn't. She met me halfway, and her lips were warm and tasted faintly of peppermint, and the kiss was not desperate or urgent or trying to prove anything. It was steady and certain, like two people simultaneously releasing the last thing they'd been holding onto. When we pulled apart, her forehead rested against mine. "Brody," she whispered. "Still here," I said. She laughed once, quietly, and it broke something loose in both of us. We talked for the next 3 hours, really talked, the kind of talking that only happens when the guards are down and the night is long. She told me about her mother's Sunday morning kitchen dancing to Chet Baker records. I told her about the first piece of furniture I ever built, a lopsided nightstand that leaned so badly I had to fold a matchbook under one leg for 2 years before I admitted defeat. Hazel laughed so hard she covered her mouth with both hands. Shepard lifted his head and regarded us with dignified disapproval. Somewhere after midnight she fell asleep on my shoulder, her hand still loosely holding mine, her golden hair soft against my jaw. I didn't move. I sat in the amber light while the rain slowed and finally stopped, listening to the pines drip, thinking about the strange and unlikely math of it all, how 30 seconds in the other direction, how one more minute of stubborn waiting, and none of this would have happened. Morning came clean and cold and new. The pines dripped silver. Pale sunlight broke through the clouds and laid itself across the kitchen floor in long warm strips. Hazel woke slowly, blinked, looked at me with 1 second of pure uncertainty before it resolved into a small, shy smile. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I said. Shepard immediately climbed onto the couch between us and demanded breakfast with his entire body. Hazel laughed and pulled him into her lap like he belonged there, which, let's be honest, he had decided he did weeks ago. We made eggs and toast in my narrow kitchen, her in her socks, humming something low and tuneless, her hair loose and gold in the morning light. The cabin felt lived in a way it never had before. Softer. More itself. When she left she stood on the porch a moment in the clean after-storm air, the sunlight catching the blonde of her hair, her white linen blouse dry again and bright in the morning. She kissed me once, quick, sure, no performance. Then she walked to her car and drove down the gravel path and the pines closed behind her. My phone buzzed 60 seconds later. Grady, so. Was it a joke? I looked around the cabin. Hazel's peppermint tea mug in the sink. Her cardigan forgotten on the hook by the door. Shepard at the window, watching the road, patient and certain. I typed, no. It wasn't a joke. It was the best thing you've ever done for me. Then I set my phone down, poured myself a coffee, and sat on the porch in the bright June morning. The river was out there somewhere, running cold and clear over limestone, reading itself the way it always had. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't in any hurry to be alone with it. Some things, it turns out, are better than quiet. And some people, if you're stubborn enough to wait 30 extra seconds, walk right through the door. Thanks for watching. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories about love, resilience, and second chances.